In this video, we look into the first phase of the LIFE methodology, listen. The LIFE methodology consists of 4 phases: listen, innovate, field test, evaluate. The listen phase includes the needs study that will be discussed in this video. Also, 2 checkpoints, project scoping and capability scoping, will be presented. The first checkpoint is your project scoping. Very important because this is where you start your project. You look into the following things. Your resources, of course. Financial resources, so what kind of funding do you have? What is your budget? And also the human resources. What kind of partners do you need? What should be the expertise of those partners? What skills do they need? And in our experience developing robotic solutions for older adults, you really require a multidisciplinary team, expertise from several scientific disciplines. So that would be, of course, the technical people who can develop the robot, but equally important is the expertise from the social scientist part. So people who have expertise on aging, on qualitative methodology, on design, and all these people are needed to make your project a success. A second aspect to look into is the robot itself. So which robot are you going to use if the goal is to develop services? And which development platform are you going to use? Because that is sort of a natural boundary on what is feasible and what is not feasible in your project. Third, of course, your objectives. What do you want to achieve? And what is also then realistic given the timeline of your project? It could be, for example, 3 years or 4 years, and any budget constraints that you have in your resources. So look into what is the current status of the robot, what could be achieved in the project duration, what is the current status, and what kind of technology readiness level do you think can be achieved? What are you aiming for? And then also during this project scoping, you write down a first idea on the use cases that you want to address, that this project should cover. So what kind of needs are you going to study? And this will be further refined and maybe also redefined in the needs study phase. So this is really a first idea. Defining a use case is an activity where you brainstorm together with in your team and with your stakeholders about the type of user and the type of needs of that user and the benefits that the robotic solution could have. Here we show an example of that and a description of what is actually the parts of a use case. You describe the situation, the profile of the user, the ecosystem, that means what other people are involved, professional, non-professional, what are the needs of, in this case, the senior, and what are then, given those needs, functionalities and expected services. A final thing that is relevant for a use case is to think of the barriers to address. Well, if we apply this to an example like falling, you could say that the situation could be that older adults are afraid of falling in their home, and they're not the only ones afraid. Also, the caregivers, the family members are afraid that this would happen. The profile would be, for example, older adults 80 plus that live in a community or in a residence that have mobility problems, but maybe also some other chronic conditions, for example, high blood pressure. The ecosystem around such older adults would usually be a home care nurse, a domestic helper, of course children and grandchildren, and maybe also contact with neighbors. So the needs, if we look a bit more into that, that would be the fear of falling, and also the fear that nobody can be warned when fallen, for example, at night. A fear of the children that their parent has fallen and cannot warn anyone, and bad things happen. And also from the perspective of the professional caregiver, a lack of information about the health condition at the moment of the fall. So was there, for example, a low blood pressure or heart rate? Given those needs, what would then be ideas of functionalities? Well, robot should then be able to, for example, detect the fall, warn the caregiver, reassure the family, maybe something with video contact, and measuring some vital parameters like blood pressure and heart rate. Those are some first ideas of what could be part and parcel of the use case. A barrier to address, especially in robotics research, is of course that older adults might be afraid of new things, that they have not as much experience with technology as younger generations, and maybe they also have some problems because they don't have internet connection or no smartphone or experience with those kind of applications. So this is what you do at the beginning of the project before entering actually the first phase of the LIFE methodology, the listen where you do your needs study. So that needs study has also several steps. First, the needs study itself. That means that you collect the data about the needs of your target population. Then a needs prioritization, because your needs study might end up with a lot of needs that you cannot all address. From these needs, you have to make a service offering description, check the technical feasibility, prioritize the final services for the project, and translate those prioritized services to a way that a consumer would express them. Well, I'll go into these different steps now. So the objective of the needs study is to identify the needs of older adults, and you can do that in different ways. For example, through a literature review, by observations, semi-structured interviews, or a small quantitative study. And usually a combination of such methods gives you the best results. But of course, this will depend on the resources that you have and the time you have. An experience from our project is that when you have very strict inclusion criteria for your respondents, for the people that you want to interview or that is in your sample for a questionnaire, it might be very time consuming also to gather the response. So in this phase, you can be more flexible than later in your project about who you're going to interview about this topic. And what we also think is very important is not only to look into the perspective of the older adult, but also the perspective of family and professional caregivers, because robotic solutions can be of benefit for multiple stakeholders, but also require input and work of different stakeholders to make it feasible also in practice to use them by the older adults. As said, we used in our project semi-structured interviews. Those were 1-hour interviews which were conducted face-to-face to the 3 different groups: older adults, informal caregivers, and professional caregivers. We looked into in those interviews what are the needs, what do people currently do to meet those needs, and how do people perceive robots in general, and we also showed them a demo of the robots that were part of the project. Some recommendations for you. Data that you collect during this need study phase should be traceable for later reference. Most of the time, the people that you interview in need study are also interested to be involved in later stages of your project, so you will also maybe co-design with them or involve them in an experiment later on, and it is then very interesting to see how their opinion might change, and also that you know that these are people that you have been involving from the beginning, and that could also lead to some sort of bias in their response. Second recommendation is to align very well what you communicate about the robot's current features and stage of development, because expectation management is very important in this project, and if people get the wrong impression, for example, that the robots are able to do already a lot of things, then they might be disappointed when you enter the next phase of your project and when you co-design with them, and they then find out that the robot is not there yet. The second step, once you have gathered all your data and analyzed it, would be to prioritize the needs. And that could be work mostly of the team, where you look into the needs expressed by the professional caregivers, the older adults, the informal caregiver, and you see what would be the priority for each of those stakeholders. Third step is a service offering description, a first description of the offer to be developed within the project. That would be the robot's mission, a description of the robot, and a description of possible services that you want to develop in your project. The technical feasibility is, of course, very important. The technical team, the technical partners in your team should evaluate roughly, with the knowledge that they have at this point in time, how feasible these features that have been defined in step 3 are, and also what would then be the technical requirements to develop those services. Then finally, you look into the prioritization of these services, and here the feasibility and the priority comes together. So the services are prioritized, services that are technically feasible and that are also prioritized by the need study. The sixth step is to describe more in depth what these services look like. So you can see here that we make an elaboration on the use case. This is an example, again, for safety and risk of falling. You define a theme. On this theme, different sub-needs, a description of the global service, a more in-depth description of the different services, the priority ranking of these different services, so what should be developed first in your project and what next, and what are the mandatories to make these services work, and what are then questions you would want to take to the next phase, to the phase where you co-design with your users. So what are the things that you are not sure at this point in time but you really want to investigate? Here you can see that we chose to write everything down in a personal way. So I am afraid of falling. I want the robot to detect dangerous situations. And we chose that to really always have the user in mind. So also in expressing these services. That was the final activity in the need study, but before entering the second phase of the methodology of life, another checkpoint is needed to be really sure. We call that capability scope. Based on the need study results, really look critically at what could be achievable or not. So what are achievable engineering objects? So what is technically available or feasible during the project period? and but also the engineering limits, what is unachievable or unchangeable in the robot during the duration of the project or in absolute terms. So actually what you do here in the second checkpoint is you pick up the results of the needs study and you also pick up the project scoping, the first checkpoint, and you combine that and really look at what is feasible or not. Having a good list of priorities and of feasibilities will help you later on in your project to make decisions when you have delays or when things don't turn out the way you planned. Then you can always fall back on this capability scoping as a sort of point of reference for your project. So in summary, the listen phase of the LIFE methodology contains the first checkpoint, project scoping, where the timelines, financial and human resources and constraints are defined and agreed upon. A decision is made on the robot and robot development platform, and the project objectives and use cases covered by the project are developed. The needs study itself identifies the priority needs through in-depth interviews with older adults, formal and informal caregivers. This is matched with the robot capabilities. The second checkpoint, capability scoping, assesses what is technically available and feasible and unachievable and unchangeable in the project as a good landmark for the next phase. The full methodology is described in the LIFE Methodology Handbook, which you can find on the project's website. This handbook and these videos have been developed as part of the ACRA project, a research and innovation action funded by Horizon 2020 and NICT. Thanks for watching.